So as BDAX works to onboard institutional players into digital assets, Brian Armstrong is doing the same. We already have stablecoin legislation, but the next step is clarity and regulation around cryptos that are not stablecoins. And he said they're making a lot of progress in DC and won't let big banks ban crypto rewards. So now we're talking about lending, staking, and all sorts of other DeFi activities when it comes to this market structure bill. Let's have a listen to what he shared recently in Washington.
I'm here in Washington, D.C. again, fighting for your rights to try to get some market structure legislation passed for crypto. This would be foundational, just like we did for stablecoins a few months ago with the Genius Act. Market structure legislation protects all the other non-stablecoin crypto assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum. The Senate is strongly supportive of getting this done. The members that I met with on both sides of the aisle are ready to get this legislation passed, and there's draft text now being exchanged back and forth and with the industry for comment, which is great. We saw a lot of alignment today. Now, of course, this hasn't stopped the big banks from trying to throw a wrench into things, and they're trying to ban rewards on stablecoins. The members of the Senate who I spoke to, they're not going to let that happen. That was already litigated and decided in the Genius Act for stablecoins. They're not going to bring it up again. But barring these little details here and there, I think this thing has a good chance of getting done. I've actually never been more bullish on market structure getting passed. It's a freight train leaving the station. So we're going to keep showing up and fighting for your rights. You can do a lot to help by going to standwithcrypto.org and contacting your representatives. Let them know that you want to see market structure legislation passed for crypto. Thanks.
So if and when this thing passes, it's going to open up the doors for a lot of those institutional players who've been sitting on the sidelines, still a bit uncertain on whether or not they should actually buy and hold crypto on their balance sheet or for their clients, and could provide the necessary rocket fuel for cryptos to pump to new all-time highs. Now I want to dive into this post from Lord Belgrave, which talks about Project Ubin, which is quite interesting. And although it is not verified, Wrath Economan did say it was fascinating, and this is someone that I tend to listen to because he really double verifies anything that he shares. And if it's not verified, he still mentions this account posted it and said it's a thesis, not a certainty. Still, it is quite interesting, and so we're going to dive into it and simplify what he shares. So in 2015 to 2017, this gentleman says that he witnessed behind closed doors how Ripple and XRP were quietly referenced in technical materials in Singapore, which launched Project Ubin. At the time, it was just an experiment. And again, these were early days because in 2012 to 2014, XRP was really new. Now, Project Ubin's mandate was a collaborative project with the industry to explore the use of blockchain and DLT, or distributed ledger technology, for clearing and settlement. Something that we already know blockchains are very well capable of. It really just comes down to who's doing the settlement and how compliant are they. We now are getting to a point where not only do we have stablecoin legislation, but we have companies like Ripple registered in New York, and they also have the ability to be custodians. We just saw that with BDAX. So these were the early days when no one really knew it would work. They just knew that if it did, this would revolutionize everything. They were already running pilots testing tokenized asset settlement, fast cross-border messaging, and finality using DLT. Now, when we talk about time to finality, that's the moment you press send on a transaction when it is finalized on the other end. Old financial systems sometimes take minutes, sometimes days, and it's very inconsistent depending on congestion. Well, with crypto, there's near instant settlement. Now, Belgrave shares his experience reviewing these prototypes at his bank when it came to liquidity savings, atomic netting, settlement obligations, consensus ledgers, and found that a lot of this was very similar to Ripple pilots. Even Ravi Menon's speech, the MAS governor behind Ubin, said that Project Ubin demonstrated that banks could pay one another without going through mass using a blockchain-based digital representation of the Singapore dollar. Now, one thing we have to remember about Singapore is that they're kind of ahead of the curve when it comes to a relatively newer nation who incentivizes global business by less taxes and less regulation. And here's where things get really exciting. This is the perfect storm because we are on the brink of the biggest cycle. Global M2 is growing. Stocks are hitting all-time highs. Gold is at an all-time high, and Bitcoin is lagging slightly, but once that hits an all-time high, many major cryptos are going to follow and arguably outperform Bitcoin because that is their personality. 9 times out of 10, smaller cryptos that are strong cryptos, something like XRP, tend to outperform major cryptos like Bitcoin into extremely bullish scenarios where now the Fed is going to continue to cut rates, or at least is expected to. So if that mood sticks, flows are going to spread into crypto. And in this video, I'll be covering everything we just talked about and give you my key play-by-play with levels that I'm looking out for, pivot points, and what this could mean for XRP if institutions really start driving trillions of dollars into crypto markets through things like tokenized treasuries. And we've been covering this over the last few days, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but this is extremely bullish for crypto markets. And like I've said over and over and over again, all dips right now are for buying. And it's one thing where you see the stock market consistently hitting new all-time highs, while it may feel like there's a negative macroeconomic backdrop, which we've covered surrounding the Fed rate cut, which is technically a negative signal. However, it's very positive for borrowing. But the only reason the Fed lowers interest rates is because we are seeing a slowing or a worsening job market, which is an indicator of a weaker economy. Either way, it's important to remember that markets can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. So selling right now just because we're at an all-time high doesn't mean that markets can't continue to climb through new all-time highs into the end of the year and continuing rallying for what seem like some impossible gains. We have to remember that markets and participants are far more greedy than anyone would ever expect. Now, that said, the Wall Street Journal did report that not only today, and I'll show you right here on the S&P, we hit a new all-time high yet again, but that President Trump announced a TikTok deal with Chinese leader Xi Jinping after the two spoke today. Now, they didn't release the details of the deal, but new investors would own about half of the company, bringing in more income revenue industry to the United States. And that's alongside the fact that the US government now owns a major portion of Intel, which recently skyrocketed because Nvidia invested another $5 billion into that deal. And so two of the coolest pieces of news right now is the fact that right now US Treasuries are getting tokenized on the XRPL, which is a $27 trillion market. Now, obviously not all $27 trillion is going to flow directly into the XRPL, but because it's such a large market, even just a portion or a fraction of this market entering into the XRPL will create demand for the XRP token, which is the underlying token that entire ecosystem runs on. Now, what's so beautiful about a business model like Ripple with their XRP token is the fact that they actually service a wide array of applications and all sorts of businesses in different manners. For example, in this case, BDAX Korea is one of the only 4 licensed crypto custodians in South Korea who is now delivering secure institutional access to XRP, RLUSD, and other tokenized assets with Ripple custody.